Today I'm going to show you how to use concrete models to represent decimals. When using concrete models to represent decimals, we want to make sure that we first establish the understanding of a whole versus part of a whole. So here I have my model with my flat here, and we want to make sure that we don't call it 100. It is a flat. This is one whole. And so we want to equate it to something that they are familiar with, like a candy bar or a sandwich or something in which this is one whole. And we want to make sure that they understand that if I cut this or I took a bite of it, for example, would I still have some of my whole? And I think all the kids would agree, I don't have one whole, but I have part of a whole. And it's important that the students understand that the purpose of fractions and decimals is so that we have a way to numerically represent the part of the whole. If I took the bite out, I need a way to represent that with numbers. And that is what I use fractions and decimals for. Fractions in 4th grade are not a new concept for the students. So every fraction has a decimal, and every decimal has a fraction. So when we introduce tenths, we could place one of these rods here on my model, and we could ask the students that if I only had this part, how much of my whole would I have? And so they can equate it back to fractions. I have one piece out of 10 pieces. And so that is 1/10. And then you can introduce that this is the way we write it as a fraction. This is the way we write it as a decimal. And we read this as 1/10. One piece out of 10. It's part of a whole. Now, we also need to understand that this is not the only concrete model that could be used. So I could give the students this, and I could place one of these units on it, and I could ask the students, so how much is represented of my whole if I just have this little one right here? It is also one piece out of 10. It's part of a whole that is 1/10 represented as a fraction and 1/10 represented as a decimal. It is part of a whole. We could also use money, something students are familiar with. This is one whole dollar. And if I have a dime, how much is that of my whole? It's part of a whole. It takes 10 dimes to make a dollar, and I have just one of them. So this is 1/10 of the dollar, or 1/10 represented as a decimal. You can continue doing this as well for hundredths. So you can go back to your flat, and you could place one little unit on there, and you can ask the students, what part of the whole do I have? I have just one piece of that whole out of how many? 100. I have 1/100th represented, which could also be represented by the decimal 1/100th. And this is when we're introducing hundredths. You could also take the dollar, do the same thing. How many pennies does it take to make one whole? It takes 100 pennies. So here I have just 1 penny. So I have 1/100th of a dollar, or represented as a decimal, 1/100th of a dollar. So this is how we use concrete models to represent decimals. Remember, every fraction has a decimal. Every decimal has a fraction.